لا إله إلا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. يا ربي لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We intend to learn and teach, to remember and remind, to give and receive benefit and gain, to encourage adhering to the Book of God and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, to call to all that is good, to call to guidance and lead to all that is good, seeking in that Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness to Allah and Allah's reward. Glorious and exalted is He. We intend what our author, Habib Ahmed bin Zayn al-Habashi, intended, as well as what Allah knows of good intentions, and we ask Allah to accept by His mercy, and He's the most merciful of the merciful. Continuing this lesson in fiqh, in the pillar of Islam, and the pillars of the deen, Islam, Iman, Ihsan, we talked about az-zakat and finished that section. Last week, we covered zakat al-fitr and recipients, and we ask Allah to enable us to recall the conditions for zakat fitr being obligatory. So under what conditions is zakatul fitr obligatory? Under what conditions is zakatul fitr obligatory?
You have to be Muslim. You have to have more than what you need to survive for that day and the next day, and then become a Oh, you have to be alive for part of Ramadan, so before and after Maghrib. Part of Ramadan, part of Eid.
Yes. So zakat fitr is due upon Muslims. And it is due upon those who possess their basic needs, not merely what you need to survive, but your basic food, clothing, and shelter, what's appropriate for you, and your dependents for the day of Eid and the following night, and those who are present for part of Ramadan and part of Eid, meaning a little bit before Maghrib and a little bit after Maghrib on the eve before the Eid. So under those conditions, someone will have to pay zakat fitr. What can you tell us about deserving recipients? Deserving recipients of zakat. Who may receive zakat and zakat fitr?
Muslim that's poor.
A Muslim that is poor. Okay. What else? Who else?
Those who are in debt.
Those who are in debt.
Slaves purchasing their freedom.
Slaves purchasing their freedom.
If they are in God's way.
People in Allah's way.
Traveler in need of money.
Traveler in need of money.
The other category of poor people who need money, who have
those who are short of money. Masakin.
Zakat workers.
Zakat workers.
And people whose hearts need reconciling.
Yeah, people whose hearts are to be reconciled. 8. What verse are they mentioned in? إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين. Surah At-Tawbah, Surah 9, verse number 60, 960. So the 8 categories mentioned in Surah 9, verse 60 are those who we may give our zakat to. That's it. Yep, very good. So, and does zakat require an intention? So, yes, no, maybe so?
Yes.
Yes, requires an intention. You must intend. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are through intentions. Imam Shafi'i said that hadith enters 70 chapters of fiqh. Many chapters of fiqh. So this week we will talk about the final pillar in some of the traditions, and in others it's listed before fasting, that being Hajj. Hajjul Bayti in istata'ata ilayhi sabila, or man istata'a ilayhi sabila. Hajjul Bayti man istata'a ilayhi sabila. Prophet ﷺ said Islam is built on 5 things: testifying that there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, establishing prayer, giving zakat, making pilgrimage to the house and fasting Ramadan. And the riwayah of that hadith of Bukhari and Muslim that is in the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. So that is a pillar of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the Hajj, Lillahi ala nasi hijjul bayt. It is an obligation for Allah upon humanity to make a pilgrimage to the house. Whose house? Allah's house. The house of Allah. That tells us something about the nobility of that work and that place to which we go. The jurists say in their books the definition of Hajj, which we'll talk about. We'll talk about more than that, inshallah ta'ala. Our author says Hajj is the fifth of the pillars of Islam. And what is Hajj? Al-Hajju in the Arabic language means qasd. That's what the jurists say. To seek something out, to intend someone or something. And in the context that it was spoken, it was intending someone of who was revered, right? Going right to them, seeking them out. In law, Hajj is qasdul bayt lin nusuk, going to the house going to the house for the performance of the rites of Hajj, right? Or going to the house for the performance of rites, of rituals. Qasdul bayt lin nusuk. We could say going to the house for rituals. Umrah is in Arabic as ziyarah, to visit. And in law, it is ziyaratul bayt lin nusuk, visiting the house for the performance of rites. So that's what we want you to note and recall. And then in the books of spirituality, they say that Hajj is seeking someone who is revered and going to them. So in this case, the meaning of going to Allah's house is going to Allah. So Allah is really one's objective, and the house is symbolic of that. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Our author says it is fard. Hajj is a fard, which means wajib, translated as an obligation. So we talked about the 5 rulings: obligatory, recommended, permissible, offensive, and forbidden. Hajj is an obligation. It's a requirement. Lillahi ala nasi hijjul bayt. It is an obligation of Allah upon humanity to make a pilgrimage to the house. So it's ruling. What is it? It's visiting or attending the house for the performance of rituals. Its ruling is that it is obligatory. One is obliged to do it with conditions. So this next section, what is the author talking about? Conditions of the obligation of Hajj, or conditions for the obligation of Hajj. And we didn't mention your objectives. We would like you to be able to define Hajj, which we've talked about, to list the obligations, or list the conditions for the obligation of Hajj from Risala. I want you to be able to list these, okay? So Hajj is an obligation on every free, legally responsible Muslim, right? So we talk about conditions of obligation. He mentions someone be free, someone be accountable or legally responsible, morally responsible, mukallaf, and that they be Muslim. And we've talked about who is legally responsible. That's someone who has reached puberty and possesses their intellect, right? So you could also break those into 2 conditions. He's just mentioned them as one. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And he says, on condition that one has the ability to go. So ability is a condition for Hajj. Right? So if someone who is unable, what does that mean? They are not obliged. And you'll notice that ability is not generally mentioned for instance, salah and so forth, but it's explicitly mentioned in Hajj. So they go into more detail about ability in the context of Hajj. And that's directly from the prophetic traditions associated with the Hajj. Hajjul Bayti man istata'a ilayhi sabila. Making a pilgrimage to the house for the one who's able to make a way. So again, it's on a Muslim, free, who is accountable, who is able to make the way. So, La ilaha illallah. Others may do so. Someone who's not accountable, like a child, Hajj may be performed for them, but they're not obliged. Nor does that count for the Hajj of their Islam. Someone said to the Prophet ﷺ, a woman held up a little boy or baby to the Messenger of Allah on his farewell pilgrimage. He said, can he make Hajj? And he said, yes, and you'll have reward. So you could carry a child or even carry someone insane on Hajj and intend for them and take them to the rites and so forth. We were with a couple this last Hajj who were making Hajj with their little son. No. La ilaha illallah. So ability, la ilaha illallah. Ability, he gives a really nice simple definition here. And it's wider than this, but this is a nice definition to start with. And it is ability, he says, ability here means that one possess what is needed to travel for the pilgrimage and back again, and payment for all the expenses of those he is legally obliged to support until his return. Right? So it means you have what you need to go and return, and also support your dependents while you're gone. So that's ability in essence, and that's talking about monetary ability. And then they go into some other details, but we just want you for now to remember this, that ability is to have what you need going and coming and for your dependents while you're gone. And you take that right out of a Risala. And inshallah, we mentioned and included a link in your syllabus where you can access this on the net. Please do access it. Review it. We would like everyone to review this section at least 10 times after this lesson. And 5-10 times before the next lesson, review the second part of Hajj. Because that's how one learns these rulings, by repeatedly reviewing them and placing them in one's mind and heart. So that is ability. So with those conditions, someone is obliged to make Hajj. With Islam, accountability, and ability, that person is obliged to make Hajj. Hajj is an obligation that is not immediately pending. It's ala tarahi. So the Prophet ﷺ, Fath Mecca was in the 8th year after his hijrah. He did not make Hajj in the 8th year, nor did he make Hajj in the 9th year. He made Hajj in the 10th year. Pilgrimage was in the 10th year. So that shows that it's not immediate, that you can make it later. However, when the conditions of obligation are fulfilled, you are now obliged to do it. So if you later become unable, that obligation remains upon you. So it's cautious not to wait for a long time once you become able. La ilaha illallah. The Prophet ﷺ said, Muhammad, and it's narrated in Al-Bayhaqi Sunan, and there's some concern with the chain. However, there's a saying, an athar of Sayyidina Umar that testifies to this on the authority of Abu Umama radiyallahu anhu from the Prophet ﷺ. He said, if someone who is not prevented by an illness or a clear need, or by illness, a clear need, or a corrupt ruler, and does not make Hajj, then let him die if he wishes, a Jew or a Christian. So it's severe. This is severe censure for neglecting this important pillar of Islam. And wonderful work, wonderful worship to visit Allah's house, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We talked in our tafsir lesson about ahadiyah, and Mecca is a clear tajalli ahadiyah. And the house of Allah is a rams of the Lord of that house, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He gives those who go to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Forgives their sins, accepts their prayers. One miyati elf. How do you say that? I don't even know how to say it in English. Yani like a whole lot of blessings, yani, for praying there in Mecca. Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah. Naam. So that's an obligation. We've understood. Condition. What is Hajj? Qasd. Intending someone or something venerated. In Sharia it is Qasdul Bayt lin-Nusuk, visiting, or we could say intending the house, seeking out the house for the performance of rituals. Its ruling it is that it's an obligation with conditions. Islam, accountability, freedom, and ability. And he said, as is Umrah. The relied upon position is that Umrah is also an obligation. And there are hadith that indicate this. So when you go make Hajj, you'll do it in a number of ways. Someone might do Umrah before Hajj, someone might do Hajj before Umrah, someone might do them simultaneously. But you'll make a Hajj and an Umrah, and that is the soundest position, that they are both obligations. Sayyidatuna Aisha asked, is jihad an obligation upon women? And the Prophet ﷺ said, a jihad in which there is no fighting, Hajj and Umrah. And that's narrated by Al-Bayhaqi and others with sound chains of transmission. And other traditions indicate that it's an obligation for men as well. No. One Umrah to another is an expiation for the sins between them. وَالْحَجَّ الْمَبْرُورِ لَيْسَ لَهُ جَزَاء إِلَّا الْجَنَّةِ, the Prophet ﷺ said in Bukhari. Between Umrah to Umrah is an expiation for sins between them. And a piously rewarded Hajj has no recompense except paradise, no reward except paradise. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So then our author goes on, and he says the acts of Hajj are three types: the integral elements, the duties, and the sunan, the sunnahs. So the Shafi'i school, unlike the Hanafi school, typically does not differentiate between furud and wajibat. And I'm leaving them untranslated for a specific reason. What did he say? Obligations or integrals and duties, right? In Hajj, they do. So Hajj has integrals that differ from duties. How do they differ? You'll understand at the end of this section. So we're going to talk about each of these types of works. Obligations or integrals, duties, and sunan. We'll also talk about things that are forbidden in a state of ihram. La ilaha illallah. So first we are going to talk about the integrals of Hajj and Umrah. And we would like you to be able to recall the integrals of Hajj from memory. We want you all to memorize. We ask Allah to enable us to memorize the integrals of Hajj and Umrah. And using your notes, tell us the times for these integrals, their beginning and end times, if that applies. Okay, so he says the integrals or the arkan of Hajj are 5. The integrals of Hajj are 5. How many integrals of Hajj? Just like Islam, 5. 5 pillars of Hajj. What are they? Ihram. Sheikh Nuh Keller translates it as entering the state of pilgrim sanctity. So you enter a unique state to visit the Lord's house, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you must. So then he defines ihram right here. And this definition is very important. People make a mistake about this. Ihram has specific clothing, but ihram is not clothing. Right? So ihram is a work of worship that requires specific dress, but it's not the dress. They'll say malabis al-ihram, the dress of ihram. So someone who puts on clothes and jumps on the plane and flies all the way to Jeddah without making intention, maskeen dem. It's got to slaughter. Okay, so what is ihram? This is the intention to perform the hajj or the umrah. Al-ihram niyatul dukhuli fin nusuk. It's the intention to perform these rituals. So one may intend hajj. One may intend umrah. One may just intend rituals and then change their intention. Or one may intend them together, but one intends to perform these rituals. So he defines it right here. We'll ask you, what is ihram? Ihram is the intention to perform the rituals or to perform hajj or umrah. It's right there. The intention to perform hajj or umrah. So someone who's flying, for instance, from New York to Jeddah, they get close to a certain place and it'll be announced, it's time to enter ihram. And they would say, for instance, they intend to perform hajj. When they did that, they entered ihram. In the case of a lady who doesn't normally wear niqab and gloves, she doesn't have to do anything with her clothes or anything. She just says, I'm intending to make hajj. And then that's ihram for her. And that's what ihram is. There's a detail here that our shuyukh keep reminding us of. Inshallah, we'll get the lesson. They don't like to say, I'm intending hajj this year. Right? Because technically, if someone did that with a real intention in Shawwal, boom, they're stuck in ihram.
Oh, wow.
Right? So they say, Ana azam al-hajj, azamtu al-hajj. I made a resolve. I have a resolution to do hajj this year. They won't say, I have an intention to do hajj this year. Okay, so what is ihram? Ihram is the intention to perform hajj or umrah. And then there's details in the longer books. When you make hajj, you'll talk about hajj and umrah or unspecified intention. But that's basically it. So by this intention, you enter this amazing state of ihram, where you can't have your head covered. So much so, someone who dies in ihram, you can't shroud their head. How are they resurrected? Saying, Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. At your service, O Lord. Someone who's responded to that primordial, Abrahamic, celestial, Adamite call of going to Allah's house, subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the state they're in. And the sha'ar of it, the slogan that they recite is Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, at your service, O my Lord. So it's an azim state that they enter, where special things are forbidden, and they are allowed to do other things. So like you can't cut your hair or clip your nails or do other things that are forbidden in ihram that we'll talk about, inshallah. So they enter ihram. That is the first of the 5 pillars, ihram. Ihram, intention to perform hajj or umrah. When is its time? When is its time? For hajj, it is Shawwal, the month of Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, the month of Dhul Qa'dah, and the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. So it has a time, a designated time for hajj, and then umrah, you can intend it, pretty much any time through the year. There's a certain point in hajj where one may not intend umrah until you finish that point, but unless one did it concurrently and so on. But umrah doesn't have a specific time. Hajj has Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, Ashra Dhul Hijjah, 10 of Dhul Hijjah. That is the time for entering umrah. And then with the works of hajj or the time for entering ihram, with the works of hajj or umrah, you are released from ihram. So you release yourself from it. You might stay there a long time. If you don't release yourself right, big problem. They say hajj clings to you. You stay there a real long time. So don't do that. La ilaha illallah. So that is the first. So one might say, I intend to perform the hajj or umrah and I sanctify myself thereby, for Allah exalted is He. So He gave you an intention. هو يقول نوى الحج والعمرة أو هو يقول نويت الحج وأحرمت به لله تعالى. And there's a detail here. If you're going to make hajj on someone else's behalf, there's a certain way to make this intention. So notice that. I intend Hajj on behalf of so-and-so, and I enter the state of ihram through it for Allah Ta'ala. Nawaitul Hajj an fulan wa haramtu bihi lillahi Ta'ala. So that is the first. That is the first. La ilaha illallah. And he says, it is not valid to enter ihram for Hajj except in the Hajj months, which are Shawwal, Dhul-Qa'dah, and the 10 days of the Hijjah. The remaining pillars, the remaining integrals are the standing at Arafah. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Hajju Arafah. So what does standing mean? To be present and not unconscious, even asleep, but not unconscious like someone who fainted. To be present at Arafah, right? In a state where you're capable of worship, meaning that you are not unconscious. What time? What is the time of Arafah? From Dhuhr time, from the time of the entrance of the Dhuhr prayer, which is the Zawal, on what? The 9th of Dhul Hijjah. So from Dhuhr on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah until the rising of the true dawn, Fajr times entering, on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. So when must you be at Arafah? You must be there for some period between Dhuhr on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah and Fajr on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. And that is most of Hajj. You get there in Ihram, everything else we can help you fix. But if you mess that up, then it's a problem. You get stuck, you got to slaughter an animal to release yourself and all kind of stuff. Yeah. Prophet ﷺ in Umrah was prevented. And that's why Hudaybiyah occurred. So there's a special way to release yourself from Ihram. And the Prophet ﷺ and his companions had to do that. They slaughtered, shaved and slaughtered their sacrificial, or slaughtered and shaved their sacrificial animals and shaved their hair to release themselves. And then they came back and made it up in the next year. So don't do that. Don't get stuck in Ihram without making it to Arafah. Because then you got to have a certain, do Dam Ihsar, certain type of release and slaughtering penalty. Though there's a detail, when you make Hajj, just put it in your notes. There's a way of making a condition where you're automatically released without slaughtering. The Prophet ﷺ taught some ladies to do that. And again, we're touching on this. You got to review before you make your Hajj, but this gives you an excellent basis. Okay, so integral number 2 is Arafah. Must be there in a state where you can worship from Dhuhr until on the 9th, until Fajr on the 10th. That is Arafah. And then Tawaf al-Ifada. And they also say Tawaf al-Rukn. So doing an integral Tawaf is one of the integrals. Tawaf is circumambulating the house of God as the angels circumambulate his throne. The best worship in Mecca is Tawaf. The house is greeted with Tawaf. You go into any masjid, you do Tahiyyat al-Masjid, you go into the Masjid al-Haram, you do Tawaf. Before Tahiyyah, before anything. Then you pray 2 rakas of Sunnah after Tawaf. So Tawaf al-Ifada, he's going to go, it has specific obligations. What is its time? The midpoint of the night on the eve of the 10th of Dhul Hijjah is when its time begins. What is the beginning time for Tawaf al-Ifada? The midpoint of the night on the eve of Dhul Hijjah. When does it end? It lasts as long as you're alive. And he's going to say that explicitly in the text. That's why we say you get to Arafah in Ihram, breathe a breath of fresh air, breathe a sigh of relief, then khalas, we can help you out. Al-Hajju Arafah, the Prophet ﷺ said. So what is the midpoint of the eve of the 10th? So the pilgrims, they on the 8th night, they go to Mina, Sunnah. Then they go to Arafah and enter ideally after Dhuhr on the 9th. They stay at Arafah, ideally till after Maghrib. They move on to a place called Al-Muzdalifah, where some of them will spend the night all the way until after Fajr enters. But the Prophet ﷺ sent those with an excuse, or ladies, or those who were elderly. After the midpoint of the night, he sent them on from Muzdalifah. After that point, you could go straight into Mecca and do Tawaf if you liked. And that's the eve of the 10th, meaning like when people are the night before Eid here, they're on the eve of Yawm al-Nahr, or the day of slaughter. That's the eve of the 10th. And Tawaf Ifada begins at that time. Sa'i is going between Safa and Marwa, two mountains in Mecca, as Sayyidatina Hajar did. The wife of Ibrahim and the mother of Ismail alayhimus salam, when she was looking for water, went back and forth searching for water. So we go back and forth 7 times between Safa and Marwa. It is a rukn. It is an integral. When is it performed? After a tawaf. So it doesn't have a specific time, it has a specific reason, which is it must follow a tawaf. Either the arrival tawaf to Mecca, which is a sunnah actually, or this tawaf which has just been mentioned, the rukn tawaf, but it must follow a tawaf. Sa'i follows a tawaf and it has no end time, just as tawaf al-ifada doesn't. And then the last is shaving or cutting the hair. And you might say shaving or shortening the hair. What does shaving or shortening mean? Shaving or shortening means moving part of 3 hair, removing part of 3 hairs by any means. Ripping them out, burning them off, clipping them, cutters, or a razor. For men, it is best that they shave their whole head. For women, it is best that they shorten their whole hair. But any removal, even just a little clip, few hairs, that accomplishes the removal of hair, which is an integral. That is one of the last works that releases you from ihram. So you're released from that state. La ilaha illallah. Its time is the same as tawaf, the midpoint of the eve of the 10th. So someone with a little bit of transportation could move on from Muzdalifah, spend a moment after the midpoint of the night in Muzdalifah, move on, stone al-Jamr al-Aqaba that we'll talk about, clip a few hairs, go into Mecca and do Tawaf Ifada, and they would have been out of Ihram. And there's sunan that they should do though, that will help them, especially if they're not someone with an excuse. But that is in essence 5 pillars of Hajj. Ihram, Ihram, Arafah, Tawaf Ifada, Sa'i, and hair removal. Khalas. Those 5 things, those are the integral works of Hajj. And they are azim works. They are azim works. And Allah give us to visit that place. Ameen, ameen. Allah give us to visit His house. Ameen. And then He says the integral elements of Umrah, they are the same as the integrals of Hajj, with the exception of standing at Arafah. So you don't go to Arafah or Mina or Muzdalifah. You stay in Mecca for Umrah, but it's the same integrals excluding Arafah. You enter Ihram, you do Tawaf, go between Safa and Marwa, you remove hair, and those are the integrals. And then there are sunan. There are sunan, the sunnah rakas after Tawaf, drinking zamzams, going to the multazam and pressing yourself against the Kaaba, and it's a place of dua, greeting the black stone, and reaffirming your covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Beautiful du'as you make as you go around Tawaf. There's the rukn where the pillar, the corner of the Kaaba where you begin Tawaf is the corner where the black stone is. And you go through 1 corner, 2 corners. The 3rd corner is a rukn al-Yamani. The Prophet ﷺ would touch it. He has a beautiful dua. 70,000 angels, or 7,000, my memory is escaping me. They make dua for you. Say Ameen on your du'as that you make after you start passing the Rukn Yamani. Say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, Assalamu ala Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-kufri wal-faqri wal-faqati wa mawaqif al-khizi في الدنيا والآخرة اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم قنعني بما رزقتني وأخلف وبارك لي فيه وأخلف على كل غائبة لي بخير. That's the dua for there. And thousands of angels say Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. Alhamdulillah. No, so it's azim worship. Those are sunan though, but these elements, those are the pillars. 5 pillars of Hajj, 4 pillars of Umrah. Hajj is qasdul bayt, intending the house. Intending the house for rituals. In Sharia, Umrah is visit or visiting the house for rituals. It is an obligation with those conditions. Ability means that you have what you need to go and come and support your dependents while you're on Hajj. So that is a little bit about Hajj and its conditions and integrals. And then we'll talk about duties in the next lesson, inshallah. And also we'll talk about things that are forbidden in Ihram. And we've caught up, inshallah. So we could take a couple questions. And there's a question here in chat that we'll start with. Do the scholars mention the extent that one should try to fulfill the condition of monetary ability? Should one crowdfund for Hajj? One could crowdfund, but whether or not one should, Allahu alam, al-qalb la yamilu ilay. Generally, begging, asking for money for yourself is blameworthy. And wallahu alam, you're not required to do that for Hajj. They do mention that if someone is able, if they're a merchant and they're able to do trade while on Hajj, they may be obliged to do that. But wallahu alam, wallahu alam. Typically in the discussion of istita'a, they don't talk about deliberately earning for it. They talk about you having the money and then having to go once you have acquired that. And Allah knows best. But we wouldn't advise someone to go out and crowdfund for themselves for a Hajj. La ilaha illallah.
You
Yes.
say you can make Hajj for someone.
Yes, you can.
Is that like for someone who's ill or?
Yes. Ability. And again, we're mentioning that this is a first elementary treatment of this subject. So in the longer books, they talk about ability oneself or ability through someone else. So someone, for instance, who is not physically able to endure the Hajj, though they're monetarily able to send someone else on their behalf, is obliged to do so. And then also someone may choose to gift a Hajj to someone and just make the intention to do it on their behalf without them sending them or paying them.
Why don't you just give them the money and do them?
I don't understand.
I mean, if you're doing it for someone who can physically do it but can't afford it.
You may not do it for someone who can physically do it and can't afford it.
Oh.
You may do it for someone who's dead or someone who's physically unable. Yeah. So when we say gift someone a Hajj, they know someone who died without having performed it. Rather than charging their heirs from their estate, which the heirs may be required to do, they just choose to gift it to them and make Hajj on their behalf. Someone who's able to do it themselves may not send someone else, nor may someone else do it for them. Yes? Wa alaikum assalam.
I have two questions. The first one, mashallah, you mentioned that if someone died during Hajj, that there is no necessity to shroud the person.
You shroud everything, but in the case of a man, their head may not be shrouded because the head of a muhram may not be shrouded. In the case of a woman, it would appear that her face may not be shrouded, but her head may be covered in ihram. And it's when they die in ihram, not when they die after being released from ihram, which still might be part of the Hajj days.
So during ihram.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question about cutting hair or shaving. Did the scholar mention anything about, mashallah, the benefit? I'm sure there is something behind the cutting or shaving. Did they explain probably a meaning of this? Or?
The meaning they explain is that it has no meaning that we can understand. So what is the meaning? Mahdul ubudiyah. They say that the Hajj. How do you understand throwing stones at a certain place? It's not understandable. So it makes one just basically not act based on some sort of intellectual conviction. Act out of mere command that you've been commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a really pure expression of ubudiyah. And they mention that specifically in the books of Suluk. And they say that that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, Labbaik bihajj haqqan haqqa ta'abbudan wa riqqa. He said, at your service, O Allah, with a Hajj, in truth, in servitude and slavery to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you could say in slavery and bondage. And that's really the deep wisdom behind all of the sharia. Even those that are understood, really the deep meaning is ta'abbud. It's that we do it because Allah has commanded us. No. So, and also a benefit they mention is that we are forced to do other than our ada when we're in the state of ihram. So it forces us to leave our adat, and that's of benefit. It places us in a state of ibadah and breaks the habits of the ego, even some of them that are good habits. In a case like a man covering his head, he's got to divest himself of what he's familiar with out of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the servant remains dumbfounded and weak and needy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, impoverished. They would even mat their hair in the past. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Hajj ash'ath aghbar. He's disheveled and dusty, and they would put something, they do talabbud of their hair. So they would deliberately do that to display their faqr, their poverty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No. And it really is unusual, like for me, it's very odd to have my forearm exposed around women, especially that aren't from my family or something. But for Hajj, you're just wearing like a towel, and you have to do it during or not. You have to. It's sunnah. You put the ihram under your right shoulder and throw it over your left. It's called ibtiba', and there's a part where that's sunnah. And again, just breaking even good habits of the nafs. So just, we're not a servant to anything, even our own likes and dislikes, especially our likes and dislikes, even our own understanding. We're just a servant of Allah who does as He commands, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any more? Yes, sir.
How long should we be at Arafah?
Arafah, basically, you must be there for an instant, right? A moment. Though they mention it's sunnah to wait outside of Arafah, and then after Dhuhr, enter Arafah. So one enters after Dhuhr, ideally, though it's very logistically very difficult now. And then one remains, ideally in our school, until after Maghrib, so that one was there during part of the day or part of the night. But as long as one is there for a moment between Dhuhr and Fajr, after Dhuhr and before Fajr, a moment, even passing through, that's enough. Yes?
What about if you're there and you have like a seizure disorder or something that causes you to go unconscious? Does that time there...
If the whole time is unconscious, it could be a problem. Briefly, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah. As long as one moment you possess your reason and so forth, it's okay. La ilaha illallah. When I was there, one of the Salihin fainted from dhikr. He laid there saying Allah, Allah, Allah all the way through the end of Arafah and all the way through Muzdalifah. They had a problem with Muzdalifah. Yeah. SubhanAllah, our first Hajj in 98. Yes.
One more question, please. Sometimes I heard about story women try to compete with men to come close to the Hajar al-Aswad.
Mushkila.
I heard also a story when their husband or whatever, they, mashallah, mahram, they go with them, they don't like this idea because of being very, sometimes can be like so close to men, because the more you come close to the Hajar, it's like more people there.
Yeah.
Is anything says that the woman shouldn't compete to come close? I'm talking about Hajj, not Umrah, because Umrah it would be easier,
Yes.
I would assume.
Yeah.
But during Hajj, if the woman really insisted that she wants to go and touch, if she can, I know sometimes you can, is that kind of like not good to do this because she may come close to men,
Yeah.
trying to, you understand my question?
I understand exactly your
What
question.
What
Yeah.
is best to do in that?
They mention, I'll tell you a story about that. There was Sayyidina Abdul Qadir al-Jilani was on his way to Hajj with one of the Salihin, and a woman from Jabal Lubnan flew to them. She flew. People walk on water, they ride horses across water. Sulaiman used to fly people places with the wind. People can fly if Allah wills. The spirits of martyrs are in birds and they fly wherever they wish in paradise. It's rationally and legally possible in Sharia for someone to fly. So she was a mar'a salihah min al-awliya al-kibar. And she made dua that she could make Hajj with Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah. So Allah flew her to him. And she accompanied them, and in the Maliki school, 2 men may travel with 1 woman. And in some of the madahib, this one included, a woman who's able to travel safely may travel to Hajj even by herself for the obligation. So they made it, and when she got to Mecca, even though she is min kibar al-awliya, she said, for a woman, setar is better. So she entered Mecca and separated from them in a state of obscurity, and they performed her rites, and she performed hers. So women and men have different dispositions physically and spiritually. And many prophetic traditions attest to that. The maslak of many of the salihin and salihat, such as Sayyidatina Fatima Zahra, who in her willed that she be encompassed in a canopy on her nash, on her funeral stretcher, so that men couldn't see the shape of her shroud. She wanted to even be mastura in death, much less in life. So setar is more becoming of women, and for this reason, jurists mention that women should do tawaf on the exterior of, on the border of the mataf, and not crowd among men at the Kaaba. And again, someone might say, oh, that's this and that. You know, the Kaaba is powerful, Yani. You can lose it. I saw people lose it. Straight up. I saw this Yemeni guy just jump like he was, these Yemenis were going. They were linking arms around these ladies, like muscling the crowd, because they still have like a ghaira. They don't want anyone bumping up against a woman, so what did? They linked their arms and bumped everyone else, you know. So they were doing this, and then one of them just broke away from the crowd and started walking along the buttress at the edge of the Kaaba to the black stone, and I could hear this elder calling him back and saying, man, you're messing up the tawaf. But he was majdoob. He was not there. He was not paying attention to what was going on. So maybe Allah knows that women's hearts are softer than men, and you know, it's good enough for them to be close, because if farther and if they got too close, a lot of them would be majadib. They say in the book, one of the best books on Hajj, Al-Manasik of Imam al-Nawawi, they talk about a mar'a salihah. She kept saying, Ain Bayt Rabbi, on her way to Hajj. Where is the house of my Lord? And in the past, you could see the Kaaba from some distance, because people had adab and they wouldn't build buildings higher than the Kaaba. So as they approached, they said, there's the house of your Lord. She ran until she got to the Kaaba and pressed herself against it and died shokan, out of longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Screamed and died. So, you know, there might be a detail spiritually that that Allah and His Messenger understood, and the knowers of God and the ulama, that we don't understand. You know, so don't second guess them. And it's brutal at the Black Stone. People get head-butted into the Black Stone. I lost my glasses there. They were knocked off. And I didn't push up there. You don't push Muslims there, but the crowd sucked me in there. And that's why I'm wearing my spares, because they got knocked off. So also I had like one of those things around your neck with your ID and everything that got ripped off at the Black Stone or near it. So it's not anywhere you want to be squashed, and you know, being squashed right up against a bunch of dudes that are all ihrammed out and sweating and everything. It's not something people really want to do anyway, normally. So I don't recommend it. Have fun. فاتن رزقنا الصدق والإخلاص اللهم لك خلصنا بالحسنى وجعله صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم الفاتحة بسم الله.